All right, so here's our second part of the lecture over environmental policy, law, and planning. So what we want to do here is take a look at some of the major environmental laws that are out there that were and are continuously redesigned and massaged and tweaked to protect us. That is what these laws are there for. They're not there to hurt people, to create problems. They're there to protect the common good and health of our society. We are a global society. These laws are United States-based laws, but they will have a global impact because what we do in the US carries out to the rest of the world and vice versa. The rest of the world, that stuff carries over to us. You may not remember it, but when Japan had those nuclear reactors melt down back in 2011, the Fukushima disaster, there was a major earthquake over there and their nuclear reactors had problems. We saw some of the fallout of that radiation on the west coast of California. It was at very low levels, so it wasn't of concern, but that's the point. What we do here impacts elsewhere, and what they do elsewhere impacts here, and vice versa. So the idea behind environmental laws is to look at protecting human health with these laws. So the NEPA, National Environmental Protection Policy Act, was established decades ago to help with environmental policies and environmental laws. And what this, let's call it NEPA, what this NEPA does is it establishes public oversight when we're trying to do something with an environmental law or policy. If we're trying to do any kind of major project, what NEPA requires is an environmental impact statement if we're going to do any kind of federal project. So let's make up an example. Business in Springfield says I'm trying to get a federal grant to develop a housing facility for seniors, or I'm going to try to build a new power plant, or I'm going to try to build a new whatever. You're putting in a highway and you're using federal funding. You have to have an environmental impact statement. NEPA requires this. And it says, all right, I want to build a highway through this part of this county, through Sangamon County. Is that highway going to destroy habitat for an endangered species? How is this highway going to impact the water quality of this county? How is this highway going to impact, etc.? That's what the environmental impact statement does, is it makes people trying to do these projects look at the environmental impact and then public opinion. Okay, let's present this to the public. We have to have a forum, allow the public to weigh in. Is this a problem? Does the public agree, disagree, etc.? So that is what NEPA is doing, is allowing the public to be involved to a certain extent when we're doing federally funded projects, these big major federal projects. Okay, so that's one of the things that's out there to help protect us. Without allowing public opinion, people could say, well, I'm just going to build a road right through the center of Washington Park, and too bad, I have the money to do it. But what about all the habitat and the species that you're creating problems for? And what about the health issues to the community around it? This is what NEPA does, is it helps protect us and gives us a bit of a voice. Not a conclusive deciding voice, but a bit of a voice. So, okay, so we're going to hit some of the major laws that are out there and look at what these are and why they're there and what they're supposed to do. So, all right, so next one here. Let me get us set. Our next major law, Clean Air Act. Clean Air Act regulates air emissions. That is a picture of City Water, Light, and Power on Lake Springfield. So you look at those smokestacks every day. What's coming out of them? This law was first enacted back in 1970, and what it does, or did, and what it's supposed to keep doing, is it provides, oh, I gotta change font size, that's way too big. Let's drop it down to about there. Okay, it provided the first nationally standardized rules in the US to identify, monitor, and reduce air contaminants. Okay, so that is, if I spell contaminants right, that is what the Clean Air Act is supposed to be doing. It's regulating those air emissions. So when those power plants are blowing out and discharging pollutants, what level is considered safe? What is the threshold for safety? So let's make it up. If they're kicking out a certain level of mercury or a certain level of different pollutants and toxins, the Clean Air Act says, here's the level. You can't go beyond this many parts per million. It's abbreviated ppms. That is the threshold that scientists have determined is safe for human health. So yes, we will pollute as a society, but can we keep it below a threshold that leads to human health issues? So the challenge is a lot of these things cost money to enact. The industry has to spend money on decreasing emissions, decreasing pollution, decreasing toxins that they're releasing into the environment. This is where you get into the opposition and kind of that fight and that battle politically. Oh, these regulations destroy businesses. Let's deregulate the air emissions so it doesn't cost industry as much and they can make more money. So this is, again, the challenge in the social and political world. Do you support those emissions even though it may cost more money to produce your power? So simple example, let's say emissions are allowable at 220 parts per million. This equals a safe threshold for humans. At or, let me fix that, at or below 220 parts per million of whatever pollutant that's being released. So to do this, it's going to cost the industry money. So let me move this out of the way now that we know what it is. So then what does industry do? Well, industry says, well, we're a business. We have to make money. And we're going to pass the cost on to the consumer. So your utility rates may go up. So, okay, is that worth it? And is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? We all can weigh in on this differently. But when you're talking to people about these laws and what they're supposed to do, these are things you have to keep in mind. So now they say, okay, let's deregulate. New regulations. We're going to change the standards. To say, new regulations at or below 400 parts per million equals safe threshold. Where does that come from? Well, maybe somebody did a study and they said, we don't really think 220 is the threshold. We think you can go up to 400 because we think it's okay that it can be safe at that level. Is there science to back this? Sometimes there is. And they say, okay, we screwed up. Let's raise the threshold. Great. That allows industry to decrease their costs, which decreases the cost to the consumer. Everybody's happy. Sometimes, though, these policies are changed without any science to say 400 is safe. Why are we changing it? Why does that get changed and that threshold get adjusted? Because this favors industry, which means they make more money. And it may be that they do pass on the savings to the consumer. Your utility rates go down. Or it may be the industry and the folks who own the business, they simply make more money. So there's lots of challenges here. But big question I would always encourage you guys to ask when this is happening I keep getting CWOP even smaller here. Is there scientific data behind the decisions? Is that why you changed the regulations to 400? Because the science said it's okay, that it's still safe? Or is it simply, we want to make more money, so let's get rid of the regulations to profit people? This creates, again, challenging dynamics when we're working with environmental policy and environmental laws. Lobbying groups come in, industry, of course the coal industry and some industries are going to push millions of dollars towards lobbying to say, let's move those thresholds to 400. Do they have science to support 400 being safe? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Look into it. But a lot of times they just push, well, this will save us money and we can pass on the savings to the consumers. So we go back to that direct, indirect cost or the cost benefit analysis. Do you want to save on your utility bills at the expense of health? Those are things we have to think about. So challenging things to work with. No simple solution here, which makes it quite interesting to work with this stuff. So, okay, so Clean Air Act, big one out there. Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act protects surface waters, lakes, rivers, streams, fresh water, even is touching a little bit into estuaries and coastal areas of the U.S. We can't regulate the ocean, but some of the coastal areas where fresh water rolls in to it. All right. Enacted back in 1972 to make the U.S. waters fishable and swimmable. Back in the 60s and 70s, Lake Michigan was terrible because of all the discharge of toxins and pollutants into it. You didn't swim or fish Lake Michigan back in the 60s and 70s. It was just terrible. Over the course of 40 years, lots of changes. That lake's great. It's got a viable multi-million-dollar fishing industry, vacation areas, people are swimming, boating, etc. Lots of great stuff. A lot of that's because of the Clean Water Act. Okay, so what is it doing? Clean Water Act is trying to identify and control what we call point and non-point source pollution. So a point source pollution is something you can identify and you can go, let me get a little pen out here. You can go, oh, wow, we got discharge right here and right here coming out of these pipes from this factory and from this wastewater treatment plant. We can identify the discharge. There is a certain level of discharge that is allowable by law. Again, back to that parts per million. How much mercury can a factory dump into the river? How much pesticide, how much pollutant, how much toxins, heavy metals, etc. There's a certain threshold that is considered safe. But point sources are things we can actually put our finger on and say, this is a discharge from this particular place. What is a level that is allowable by law because it's considered safe for human health? We then also look at things called non-point source. Oh, these are a little harder to identify. It's coming from that field or from that subdivision or that village or town over there. You can't put your finger on one person or one specific entity. It's just the wastewater discharge or the runoff from the rain we may have had in the last couple of days that carries all that into your body of water. So who would you go back to if it was coming out of a farm field? Which of those three fields right there, field 1, 2, or 3, is the cause for the pollution, the pesticides to wind up in the river? Well, you may not be able to determine that. So we'll talk more about non-point source in the next lecture and look at why we're really concerned about the Clean Water Act and what it's going to do for us or what it does for us.